Hi everyone, good day. We are Group White, and today for the sector analysis, we will be presenting on the manufacturing sector of Trinidad and Tobago. These are my group members: Lamoya Kane, Shania Chapman, myself Priscilla Charles, Janelle Diosaran, and Jamila Dumas. For this presentation, our agenda is to give a brief introduction and history of the manufacturing sector. We will also present on the performance and impact of global financial and economic crisis, globalization and its effect, government pros and cons as a facilitator to the sector, implementation of CSME and how it affects the sector, draw conclusions, and give recommendations. Introduction. This group sector analysis is an extension to the case study assignment, which was based on the economic activities carried out by firms in CARICOM countries. Now, the purpose of this study is to conduct a sector analysis of Trinidad and Tobago and determine the most viable sector. So when we did our evaluation, we found that the manufacturing sector was indeed most viable. In this presentation, an analysis will be done to elaborate on the manufacturing sector of Trinidad and Tobago. I will now pass you on to Shania.
Good day everyone, my name is Shania and I will be presenting on the history of Trinidad and Tobago's manufacturing sector. It started as TTMA, also called the Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturing Association, and their duties surrounded further ways of expanding the manufacturing sector. It started off working with sugar and cars in terms of forming the cars to reach a good GDP, but an increased one when expanding to the steel and petrochemical production. The government imposed tariffs to protect this sector as it was now emerging. Now, before the World Wars, oil and agriculture grew thanks to the Industrial Development Corporation and aid to the pioneer industries in the 1950s, where they were able to produce 100 new production processes, but with a lower finished good value. In the 1970s, the import finances were scarce due to abusing the use of the local produce. The new manufacturing sector model would involve the 6 principal subsectors, which are chemicals and non-metallic products, beverages and tobacco, assembly, wood products, food processing, and printing. From this, 25% made up assembly but with few exports, 16% for food processing. Currently in Trinidad and Tobago, it still produces the well-known Angostura bitters. Prior to COVID-19, 2015, imports reflected 11.4% in GDP, and the government strategized using more local products from gathered World Bank data. Trinidad and Tobago does well in the food and manufacturing sector, where agriculture made up most exports. Manufacturing experienced the greatest peak in 2020's Q2 at a 21 GDP compared to the 5 previous years, which I will touch on. In 2015, it was 18.6, 2016, 19.3, 2017 and 2018, 19.6, 2019, 19.2, the first quarter 2020, 20.3, and the second quarter 2020, 21. However, a tally of all these years reflected the petroleum and chemical products as the highest earners in this sector compared to the other ones. As the pandemic approached, the Twin Island was still able to keep work flowing and supply in demand products for consumers at this time. So think of anything during the pandemic that people would have wanted greatly. Non-essential firm closings stood at 25% and the unaffected firms at 31%.
Good day everyone, my name is Janelle and I am here to present on the performance of the manufacturing sector. At present, the manufacturing sector is the largest sector in the English-speaking Caribbean. It also is the third largest contributor to the country's GDP behind the oil and services sector. The food, beverages, and tobacco is the largest subsector of the manufacturing sector, and it accounts for more than 50% of the manufacturing outputs. It is not considered to be a major employer of the labor force, as it employs under 10% of the labor force. Yes, it is a foreign exchange earner, and it is the second largest foreign exchange earner of the country. Okay, this slide illustrates two tables. In the first table, it illustrates the share of the GDP as a percentage employment and foreign exchange earnings of the export by the manufacturing sector. The period was for 2014 to 2018. As you can see, in 2014, the GDP was over 16%, employment was over 50%, and the export was over $4 billion. However, in the year of 2015, there was a decrease. Then in 2016, there was an increase, 2017, a slight decrease, and in 2018, an increase. So therefore, there was a fluctuation. However, based on the figures, it still performed well. The other diagram illustrates the target of the subsectors, the different subsectors of the manufacturing industry, as well as its export. As you could see, based on the diagram, the manufacturing of food and beverages still remains to be the dominant sector, as reflected by the figures. Lastly, for the performance of the manufacturing sector, we discuss the large players and products provided. Some of the large players are Trinidad Cement Limited, SMG Lee Limited, Bermudas Group Limited, National Petroleum Limited, Whitco, National Flour Mills, and Atlantic LNG, just to name a few. Some of the products that you can see illustrated on this slide are biscuits, beverages, cement, pepper sauce, and a gentleman spraying pesticides. Thank you.
Shania, again, I would be presenting on the impact of the global financial and economic crisis. Trinidad and Tobago was affected by the clinical collapse, recession, and coronavirus pandemic. The manufacturing sector lacked foreign exchange, which led to dropped oil prices. From this, there was a wait period for raw material imports using foreign exchange. The TT dollar in 2016 was 6.1%, and firms reliant on raw material imports could make their own foreign currency. The recession from 2007 to 2009 happened through the increased pricing of houses to a fall, which was terrible for loan borrowers. The quick collapse of the 2000s was mainly due to stagnation and seeking help too late. Trinidad and Tobago dominated oil and gas before COVID-19, with manufacturing at 19%. From the pandemic, over 25% of the manufacturing workers were jobless, but mostly through the essential services sector. Construction was inactive May 2020, but became active towards healthcare facilities and the QREP interchange project. I will list some completed projects, which include the Arima Hospital, Light Industrial Park, and the Churchill Roosevelt Highway.
Globalization is the interdependence and interconnections of nations and countries. Trade, transport, and technology facilitates the movement of goods, products, people, and information. So the question we have is, do increasing globalization play a role in developing or destructing the Trinidad and Tobago manufacturing sector? We answer this by looking at the effects on production and markets. Some of the advantages of globalization in the manufacturing sector are potential foreign investors, expansion of the manufacturing sector, larger contribution to the GDP, and economic growth. Currently, Trinidad is seeking to attract more foreign investors in the manufacturing sector in order to increase the country's economic growth. In the past, Trinidad benefited from foreign investors in developing its natural oil reserves and helping them to become the largest Caribbean country in manufacturing. Through globalization of production, Jamaica has experienced the ability to manufacture apparel in order to satisfy global demand. Exported to the US under Assembly Program, it gave them a 21% representation of their GDP. Though all these advantages are beneficial and healthy for our sector and economy, we still have some disadvantages to explore. One of the biggest negativity of globalization is competition. Companies may enter the global market with their advanced technology and resources and cause a reduction in market share for local companies. When globalization was in its heights in the 1990s, the Caribbean had a shift in increasing output in other sectors such as tourism and the services sector, but the manufacturing sector was stagnant for most of the countries. Globalization of production can also cause capital flight. Investors may want to invest in larger countries with lower production costs rather than Trinidad and Tobago. One example is when Jamaica output decreased in 1998, it was due to a NAFTA agreement between the US and Mexico, which gave Mexico the competitive edge of producing apparels. This would have affected Jamaica by displacing their employment rate and their GDP. Crises such as COVID-19 pandemic has forced some companies to reduce production or shut down operations. Trinidad Cement had stopped most of its operation in both Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados in response to the global pandemic. This may have a negative effect on the manufacturing sector and its subsectors, therefore losing revenue and reduction in the GDP. Overall, we can say the advantages would increase the GDP in the sector of manufacturing while contributing to a healthier economy. On the other hand, disadvantages may decrease the GDP while displacing the economy. With that information, one can see that increasing globalization playing a positive role in developing the Trinidad and Tobago manufacturing sector is possible. With appropriate forms of protectionism, the negative impact on the manufacturing sector from the increasing global competition can allow the sectors to remain competitive. I will now give you Lamoya on government pros and cons as facilitator to the manufacturing sector.
So we would have decided that the government should in fact play a facilitative role in the manufacturing sector. So the government as a facilitator supports the sector by performing two major functions. Firstly, the government helps businesses within the sector by formulating business-friendly policies. More business-friendly policies include tax relief policies for upcoming businesses and subsidiaries for special businesses within the sector. As a result, this will contribute to an improvement for both the sector and the economy. Secondly, the government creates an institutional apparatus for the implementation of the policies, right? There are various government bodies that protect businesses within the manufacturing sector to help them grow further. For example, Ministry of Trade and Industries. Now we're going to look at the advantages. And first we have create export opportunities. This goes hand in hand with help with greater market access regionally and internationally. So government would partake in trade agreements regionally and internationally. For example, the CSME, which we will discuss further along the presentation, right? They also can enforce fair trade laws right? That would encourage exportation. Thirdly, we have import duty concessions. This allows local manufacturing companies to receive exemptions on imports and or custom duties for items they import as supplies for their manufacturing or processing needs, right? Last but not least, we have the financial incentives, fiscal incentives, and these are awarded to large-scale manufacturers under the provision of Fiscal Incentive Act, where an organization can benefit from exemptions from custom duties on construction of an approved project, VAT, which is value added tax, income tax on dividends or other distributions, and outer profits or gains derived from the manufacture of an approved product during the tax holiday period. Now we're going to take a look at the disadvantages, right? So there might be an increase in taxation and other tariffs. So since the government as a facilitator would have permitted import duty concessions, they might increase tax in other areas within the sector, right? There can also be increased fees in transshipment operations, and government may withhold relevant information and place demands on company operations, right? So if they when they actually make a trade agreement, in everything we do have fine print, they would it depends, because if it's going to be a disadvantage, right? If the information is being published, they would keep that to themselves. And last but not least, the long fiscal incentive application process, right? So there are over 250 manufacturers on the island, right? And if the government is going to cater to, the sector, this could take some time to process all the applications for all of these establishments. And we'll pass on to
Implementation of how CSME affects the sector. The Caribbean Single Market Economy, known as CSME, is a program aiming at improving the seamless integration of the Caribbean community and common market. This development contributes to the advancement of the Caribbean Basin's collective economic development by implementing established trade agreements. Trinidad and Tobago's manufacturing sector will benefit from the full implementation of the CSME. This is due to the basic principle of encouraging unrestricted regional movements of labor, goods, services, capital, and establishment rights. The combined market power enhances the capacity to manufacture commodities while also lowering the prices of obtaining goods and services that may need to be imported through the free movement of essential raw materials. As a result, Trinidad and Tobago's manufacturing industry will have a more sustainable import-to-export ratio. CSME will positively enhance the firm's development. This is because of its freedom of movement and access to a larger pool of intellectual development strategies. This diversification will inspire the growth of various manufacturing approaches by eliminating the one regressive consistent rule to the manufacturing process. The implementation of CSME will benefit Trinidad and Tobago's manufacturing industry and accelerate the country's economic development. I would now pass you on to Janelle.
Good day again. I will be presenting on the conclusion of the manufacturing sector. At present, based on the findings, the most valuable sector to invest in would be the manufacturing sector. Based on the performance, it is the largest sector in the English-speaking Caribbean. It is the third largest contributor to the country's GDP, and it is also the second largest foreign exchange earner. The manufacturing sector has faced both negative and positive effects, such as the recession, Clico collapse, which caused the prices of oil to fall, which caused the country's currency to decrease. The COVID pandemic also caused the closure of businesses and therefore resulting in job loss. However, in the midst of these challenges faced, the manufacturing sector still manages to remain a resilient and dominant sector. I'll present the recommendations to the Board of Directors. Based on the findings, I recommend that the firm invest in the manufacturing sector, as the manufacturing sector is the largest in the English-speaking Caribbean. Also, the most dominant subsector in the manufacturing sector is the food, beverage, and tobacco, as it accounts for more than half the total output of the manufacturing sector, as well as it being the second largest foreign exchange earner for the country. Also, the state plays a facilitative role, and it offers incentives, import duty concessions, and developmental grants, which can be beneficial to the firm. Other advantages would be the low energy cost, strategic location, the market access, and the skilled labor force. However, the difficulty faced is the availability of the foreign exchange. Thank you.